Although I guess it did cause a bit of a stir, this whole thing with the Chinese rocket supposedly on an uncontrolled re-entry into the atmosphere. No one knows where it's going to land. Is it going to land on top of our houses, or is it going to land in the middle of the ocean somewhere? It's quite the stir that it's created, and well, we won't go down the media rabbit hole, I guess, for the purposes of this discussion, because there's a whole clickbait angle to this as well about how it's an immediate front page story. Like the Chinese have got this thing falling out of the sky. They're not saying anything, and all of that. But anyway, but the thing that was really interesting to me about this whole thing, which we were just talking about before we got on, was just the whole, I guess, admin procedures, all that aspect to it that may not be immediately obvious. I guess, we've got the history of from the 20th century where, they launched rockets into space, put men on the moon, all that sort of stuff. And then it's kind of become a bit routine in a way. We don't hear about launches anymore. There's I don't know how many tens of thousands or more of satellites orbiting the Earth. Obviously, they're going up. They've been going up, for years, and quietly, that no one's ever reported on, and there would have to be regulations around this sort of thing.
Oh, there are loads of regulations, and I mean, this isn't an unprecedented situation by any means. I mean, things tumble to earth all the time. I think the thing is, this one's actually going to get through the atmosphere. They've worked that much out. But 1976, the American Skylab. Was out of control. No one knew where it was going to land. They didn't know what it was going to hit, and as it turned out, it landed somewhere in Western Australia, in the middle of nowhere in Western Australia. So we've seen these sorts of things before, but all reports here are that the rocket, whether it's controlled or uncontrolled, will probably land somewhere in the Pacific. So it's no big deal unless, of course, someone wants to reuse that rocket.
I guess a finders keepers thing, maybe, or maybe it's just the launcher has to go out and clean up the mess afterwards.
Oh, I think they paid big rewards to get Skylab back. I seem to remember someone getting $250,000, which was huge back in the 70s, for locating the main debris. But who knows? Maybe there'll be a race on to get to this rocket when it returns. But I think these days, it's the tech's all pretty standard, probably in every rocket.
But what about the fact that so much has been launched into space, sort of under the radar, and there's those. I think we've spoken before. Those graphics that pop up from time to time of the Earth being basically, it's got another level of shielding around it, which is space junk, orbiting around the place. And at some point, I would think that they couldn't just keep launching stuff the way they have been.
Well, that's the ongoing discussion, and you pointed it up before. So theoretically, anyone in the age of CubeSats, which are the small, usually about 1 kilogram little satellite, anyone can put one up there to do their own experiments. It'll cost you about $30,000. And then on top of that, you almost pay an admin and management fee. So you'll have, in Australia's case, you have the Australian Space Agency. You've got NASA in the US and JAXA in Japan. So every country that has a space capability has an administrative organisation. And you have to have permission from that country, wherever you're launching your rocket, to put it into space. Basically, they will go through every line of code in your satellite, and they will look at it from top to bottom and then approve it. And then, somebody has to maintain an uplink and downlink for communication. So this is where the space industry is growing, and it's hard to believe that probably for around $30,000 Australian, you and I could have a SciTech Culture CubeSat up there in space.
Well, that would certainly put our podcast into the stratosphere now, wouldn't it?
Well, that's right. We have our own secure link, and people could hook up to the CubeSat and download our podcasts. And wouldn't that be marvelous?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I was actually also just wondering, just the international relations aspect to this. Obviously, the this particular story is essentially, a concern for many countries because it's it's not the CubeSat that's coming down. It's a 30-meter long, used up rocket coming from that was launched from a country, like on a country level, nation level. So and I guess that's another aspect to this story, that when, say, something doesn't go right or doesn't or can go wrong, it's not just about the country's responsibility. It starts becoming more of an international thing because, if it doesn't end up landing somewhere, like, it can only, well, I guess embarrassing is the lightest way to put it, but if a country launched something up into space and then its debris ended up in another country and maybe potentially caused some damage, that can't be a good look, I would think.
Well, we all know how insurance works. Somebody's got to pay. Now, space is very highly regulated, but space law is still evolving. And in Australia, actually, we have a number of groups that are leaders in space law, and they look at everything from, geopolitical standpoint, safety, admin, risk, etc., because everything that goes up into space is insured. Yeah. And, if it lands, anything that we send up lands in the wrong place, someone's going to have to pay. So there are lots of different laws. There are laws about protocol. There's laws, obviously, that are coming into play in this particular story about is the descent of this rocket controlled or uncontrolled? Does it matter? Is the communication there? There's a whole story behind this that probably, I would gather from the response that no one wants to shoot this rocket down because it's actually just going to land in the ocean. So, however, I guess it maybe what the point of the story is to say is that if the rocket genuinely was out of control, that there's a capability there that nations would take to protect themselves, which really ultimately makes sense. You don't want really any of these, especially a 30-meter long rocket landing back in somebody's city.